Deep in the ancient elder forest, sunlight penetrates the dense crowns and the spots of light under the scattered lights and shadows, and the young farmer Eric is digging the soil. He was 22 years old and moved in the village in the frontier since he was a child, with his hands full of old sluts, and never forgot the righteous fire that he had paid heavy weight to the old people in the village as a child. Today, he followed a mist legend and found a rare herb that could cure the disease in the village, and accidentally dug out a knife. The sword body was as dark as the night, and strange runes were engraved on the sword blade, emitting strange purple light. As soon as Eric held the handle, a cold energy penetrated into his heart like a poisonous snake. He felt a dark force awakening, invading his thoughts as if he was murmur, causing the illusion of the village in front of him to burn. Afraid that he was like a tide, he was a pure farmer, and he had never faced such a curse, forcing himself to calm down and hold the handle tightly. Suddenly, a deep roar came from the forest. One head guarded the wilderness, a giant thorn wolf with red eyes lit up from the bushes. Its fur is full of thorns, symbolizing the ancient defense of the forest. Eric failed to react. The wolf had already swung him, and he instinctively swept the siege. The blade slashed over the air and made a sharp cry, forcing the wilderness to retreat, allowing the curse to drill deeper into his brain. He felt the sense of justice in his body fighting against the darkness, and his hands were shaking slightly. Just at a critical moment, an old voice echoed from the tree. "Young man, you hold the Eva in your hand." A wise man in the forest appeared, wearing a cloak of green leaves, and his eyes were as deep as ancient trees. The wise was a prophet of the game. Knowing Eric's origin, the forgotten village, Eric witnessed the pressure of the leader since childhood and always stood up to protect the weak. This made the wise point out, "Your heart is as pure as a sword, and it is easy to be swallowed by darkness. Let it go, otherwise evil will spread like a plague." Eric gasped, forcing his sword to retreat into the forest. He turned to the wise and said hurriedly, "But this sword, it calls me to fight against the greater threat." The wise smiled slightly, and his words were whispered like a wind, "That is your way, and the shadows of the mainland of Middle-earth are waiting for you." Eric felt a sense of determination igniting in his heart. He put the sword in his bag, glanced at the ancient road deep in the forest, and prepared to take the first step. The lowly words of the forest seemed to guide him forward. Eric held the sword in the cloth bag tightly and walked hard along the forest. The air in the forest became more and more solemn, and the trees around it seemed to have come alive, and the branches hung low like warning sentries. He recalled the words of the wise man, and the figure under the green cloak had now turned into a vague guide. As a farmer in the border village, Eric never thought that his blood would cause greater destiny. At this moment, he felt a hidden courage awakening in his body. In front, a gray curtain covers the earth, revealing a trap belt that intersects the pits and vines. This area is an ancient defense line of forests, and it is said that it has swallowed countless people. Eric took a careful step, relying on the farmer's direct vision to avoid potential dangers. His feet slid in the mud, and his sweat slid down the magnitude, reminding him that a simple and pure righteousness could not easily resolve the experience in front of him. Suddenly, a low murmur came from the mist, condensed and formed by the lilac light. Several ghosts appeared. Their bodies were as illusory as smoke, and their eyes were flashing with faint blue light, as if the guardians of the forest were summoning the darkness. These creatures are extensions of the sect, vowing to drag Eric back to the depths and seal the dangerous force forever. He instinctively pulled out the sword, and the blade reflected cold green light, reflecting the surrounding mist, causing the ghost beast to slowly retreat. The wise man follows up from behind, his pace is as light as a fallen leaf. "Boy, your family was the pioneer of defending Middle-earth." His voice was low and rapid, and his eyes were as deep as ancient spring water. "I have seen your ancestors, and they fought against chaos with a pure heart and paid the price. Now, it's no coincidence that this drama has chosen you." Eric gasped, forcing the sword to retreat approaching ghost beast, and shouted, "I just want to protect the village. Why is this always chasing me?" The wise man pointed his head slightly, and his language would definitely not be leniency, "Because you have not escaped. Learn to use that sword instead of letting it use you." As the voice fell, a trap suddenly collapsed, and Eric fell into a deep pit. He snapped, and the tip of the sword broke through the air and dispersed the shape of another ghost beast. The dark power tried to invade his will, but he gritted his teeth and calmed his feet with his inner determination. The battle lasted for a while, and the ghost beast gradually dissipated into the mist. Eric wiped off the sweat from the amount and turned to the wise. "Will you go with me?" The wise man slammed his head and a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. "My road is in the forest. You have taken the first step, go, the shadow of Middle-earth is waiting for you." Eric clicked his head, put away the sword, and continued to move towards the village. The voice in the forest gradually calmed down, his heart beat slowly and down, and his pace gradually merged into the rhythm around him. In front, the vast mainland is opening its embrace. Eric stepped out of the forest, and saw the silhouette of the village in front of him. The smoke was ripped in the twilight, not with the warmth of the past. The muddy path extends to the walls of the wooden siege, and the watchtower is now slanted, like a tired sentinel. In the village, several households closed their doors and windows, and the air was filled with a burning breath, making him realize that the dark shadow had quietly entered. He held the cloth bag tightly and his pace accelerated, thinking that this journey might not be a relief, but another storm. As soon as he entered the entrance of the village, a tall figure appeared from the shadow, wearing a worn cloak, and a long bent bow hanging around his waist. That was Rayon, a wanderer in the past, who had passed by the village in Eric's childhood and shared family stories. Rayon's eyes were as deep as the night sky. He glanced at the cloth bag in Eric's hand, his eyebrows were snaking. "Boy, what you brought back is not a gift." His voice was rough, and he carried the warning of the surrounding travelers, as if every word was carrying the fatigue of countless journeys. Eric looked at him directly, suppressing his inner anxiety. "Rayuan, I didn't choose. This drama picked me." He responded briefly, trying to show what he had learned from the forest. Leon hurriedly and led him to an old well in the center of the village. Several villagers gathered with scars on their faces. "The village has been plundered, and the spies' hidden secrets can be seen. Someone witnessed a suspicious figure sneaking in and stealing the living food last night." Eric felt a little nervous. He was a farmer and had to rest assure these tired neighbors. "Everyone heard, I know I don't have enough food." Eric raised his voice, his speech was full of determination, "but we are not lambs to be slaughtered. I will take people to the mountain road for help." The villagers said softly, suspiciously in their eyes, and one of them shouted, "That drama will destroy us. It brings these evil ends." Leo Eric, his words were calm and composed. "My family was once the guardian of the sword, and our blood was connected to its curse. Eric, if you can control it, we might be able to reverse this disaster." He revealed his background. The ancient vow made Eric understand that this traveler was not a coincidence, but a destined ally. In a brief conversation beside the well, Eric felt the weight of responsibility. He allocated only the remaining mouths to calm the rest of the crowd, and at the same time exchanged glances with Rayuan, deciding on the next step. When night fell, they checked the traps around the village and prepared to cross the steep mountain road. Eric's pace is no longer as hesitant as a farmer, but is gradually integrated into the law of this land, and the relationship between partners deepens without saying a word. The lights in the village were getting stable, and he knew that the journey was about to begin. Eric and Rayon quietly left the village before dawn, with only the remaining dry fries and belts stuffed in their backpacks. The mountain road suddenly rose from the village and winded into the cloud-covered valley. The stone walls were covered with thorny vines, blocking the road ahead like guarding. The air turned, and the damp wind blew from the high, bringing a biting chill, making Eric's breathing heavy. He held the shadow snail in the cloth bag tightly, and although his pace was fixed, he felt that the edge of his physical strength was approaching. They advanced along the narrow sheep's tiny ridges, with deep and invisible cracks on both sides, occasionally rocks falling from above, giving off a low echo. Leon, the long bow in his hand, was constantly alerting the surroundings. "This road was once the patrol line of my ancestors, and it was full of old traps," he said softly. His language was filled with exhausted wisdom, like a sage guide who had been through the wind. Eric responded with a headshot. "I haven't forgotten the warning in the village, but we have to be quick." His words were simple and powerful, and he developed the endurance he had grown from the farmland. The sky was dark, heavy rain suddenly came, the rain fell like a sharp arrow, and the muddy ground became slippery. Eric's legs began to tremble, not because of the cold, but because of the long-hidden fear in his heart. Since he held the sword, there was always invisible darkness chasing him in the dream. This minor obstacle made him breathe, and Rayon stopped and patted him on the shoulder. "Boy, hold on. My family once paid for this drama, and the curse in the blood will make us unable to rest forever." This sentence reveals the deep roots of Rayon, who was a descendant of the Guardian clan and has inherited the burden of this shadow for generations. Just as they tried to find a cover, the spy of the Dark Lord emerged from behind the rocks, 3 soldiers in black robes, holding swords and throwing the net. Their eyes flashed with voracious light, and they were obviously coming for the sword. The war broke out. Rayon's long bow shot out a precise arrow, forcing one person back, while Eric danced in the shadow drama, and the blade flashed in the rain, blocking the other person's weapon. Suddenly, a spy threw a net, snatched Eric's leg, and pulled him towards the edge of the yacht. He slammed, his strength had reached its limit, and he was only in a righteous impulse to turn over and fight back. After the battle ended, they set fire in a hidden cave. As the flames swayed, Leon opened a cloth bag wound. "We go, but the call from this drama will attract more enemies." Eric wiped the blade and said tiredly, "I will learn to control it, no longer just a farmer." The two shared the verbal words, and the relationship between allies deepened in this silence. The night was getting colder, and they were ready to move forward, and the challenge of the mountain road was still waiting ahead. Eric and Rayon stood up in the cave's footsteps. The sky was light and the mountain wind brought a clear breath. They packed up their simple decorations and continued to climb up the winding mountains. Deep in the mountains, clouds covered like gray curtains, revealing rugged glacier cracks. These natural barriers are like invisible soldiers, blocking the way forward. Eric's shoulders were sore, he tightened his shadow drama to his waist, trying to ignore the exhaustion of his body every step, and he couldn't help but think about the days in the village, which was his shelter. Soon, they encountered the first obstacle. In front of a wide glacier crack, the sound of the air came from deep purity, as if the earth was warning. Leon has a brow, and with a rich experience, he quickly evaluates the terrain. "This cannot be hard, the crack is too fragile, and you will be done if you make a mistake." His words carried the old practitioner's fault, like a hunter who inherited the ancient road. Eric pointed his head, took a deep breath of the cold air, and walked to a narrow side. The road was steep and muddy, and their pace became slow, and it took an extra amount of energy every step forward. As fatigue flowed like a tide, Eric's hands began to tremble, not because of the chill, but because of the unknown worry. The whisper of the sword blade roared around his ears, reminding him of his negative mission. Finally, they arrived at the entrance of the shore, a stone arch covered with vines and moss, hidden behind the clouds, with the fragrance of Chinyan soil in the air. Stepping into the depths, the light-like illusion light began to flash, guarding the soul, and the blurred figure appeared like a ghost, trying to attack Eric's heart with an illusion. A illusion pulled him into the vortex of darkness. He saw the village burning and turning his men into ashes. That was his deepest fear. The sword vibrated in his hand, and Eric bit his teeth tightly, swaying the inner sense of justice to the sword counterattack. "This is not true," he shouted, his voice as if it were rocks, tearing the phantom apart. The reaction suddenly came, and a wave of energy that was guarding the soul revolved, forcing him to kneel down, and his physical strength was almost exhausted. Rayon stepped forward, attacked with a long bow, and pulled Eric up at the same time. "Boy, get up. This drama is not something you can catch in a casual manner." They retreated to a safe alcove and a faint firelight emerged. Surrounding the fire, Rayon revealed more family past events. "My ancestors used this drama to disperse the darkness, but it also brought endless disasters. My father was guarding his life while he was keeping his life, leaving me with this bloody shackle." His words were filled with bitter memories and warming the air. Eric heard, holding the sword's hand gradually became stable, and he felt an energy flowing through his fingertips. I won't let it destroy us. In this quiet, they share the final word, and the Allies' new port is more tight. The flames weakened, and they stood up and were ready to continue to explore the depths of the mountain, and the challenge of the journey was still extending ahead. Eric and Rayon left the ridge of stone arches and walked down the winding ridge. The dusk was drizzling, and the wind of the mountain storms rolled up fine snow, like a shaped sentry on a whispered warning. Eric's pace was steady, and he hid the shadow drama under the wind, and the cold touch of the drama reminded his shoulders of his mission. Leader Leon swept across the surrounding skeleton forest, and the shadows there covered the secret little girl leading to the Dark Leader's main realm. Their breathing turned into white fog in the cold air, and their steps accelerated to avoid possible tracking. Soon, they arrived outside the camp, a fortress made of obsidian, surrounded by high-pitched spires, and the brazier on the top of the tower cast a bloody red light. The patrol team paced back and forth between the narrow passage, holding long spears and torches, and their breath was filled with the smell of decay. Eric lowered his body and slid into a pitch-black underground tunnel, the entrance hidden behind the rock master. The tunnel is curved and narrow, with moist moss on the wall, and the pungent smell of metal is everywhere in the air. They stepped forward on the stone wall, and they had to suppress their breathing at every step to avoid the patrol eyes and ears. Suddenly, a metal ramming sound came from the front, and a team of soldiers turned into the tunnel, and the shaking of torches illuminated their armor. Rayon pulled Eric and quickly dragged him into a sideway. The darkness was as thick as ink. "Don't act," he murmured, voice carrying the hunter's precision. "Their eyes are only staring at the light." Eric pointed his head, holding the handle tightly, and a familiar warning surged into his heart. He recalled how he had wild animals in the fields at night in the village, and this time he faced a more deadly threat. As the soldiers walked away, they continued to move forward and encountered a second obstacle, a flashing rune barrier embedded in the tunnel wall, flashing blue light like an ancient spell. Touching the boundary that would lead to a destruction, Rayon crouched down and carefully examined the twisted symbols. "My ancestors tried to seal something similar," he said, a tangled and exhausted reverberation in the verbal tune. "They thought they could use blood to suppress darkness, but they only changed to the family's top disaster." Eric heard it, feeling a warm current spread in his chest, and he replied lightly, "Then we don't repeat it. Use your knowledge to bring us through." Leon shaves a layer of dust with a dagger, revealing the weakness of the rune. They worked together to crack it, and Eric's thorn vibrated slightly, as if responding to the rune's energy. Finally, the barrier dissipated and they slipped into a hidden basement, filled with broken boxes and spider nets. "The air here is quiet," and Leon set off a small cluster of flames to share more of the family's past. "My father was a guardian, but at the last moment hesitated, causing everything to collapse." His words made Eric even more sure. "I won't," Eric said, his eyes flashing and determined. "I can feel the restlessness of this drama, but we will find a way to destroy it." After a while of rest, they lifted up the equipment and prepared to dive deeper into the camp, and the challenges on the road were still unscathing. They quietly left the basement and advanced along the narrow passage deep in the tunnel. On the rock wall, the delicate green swelled like a living creature, which was a sign of the curse and fog. There was a decadent sweet fragrance in the air, making people dizzy. Eric took the lead, holding the shadow drama in his hand, and the drama reflected a faint light, reminding him of the heavy lifting on his shoulder. Then, Rayon held the dagger tightly and looked around with a warning. He had faced similar traps in the wilderness, but this time the mist seemed to be more sensible, gradually invading their physical strength. Suddenly, a low roar exploded from the darkness, and a group of bloodthirsty monsters stormed out like a tide. They are twisted creatures, covered with flakes of skin, and sharp claws scratched the stone walls with harsh sounds. The leader, a tall monster, with his eyes flashing with thirsty red light, took the lead in swaying towards Eric. The curse smoke made the mess, and the visual line blurred into a gray fog, making every step feel like it was slamming in a swamp. Eric instinctively rolled up the shadow snare, and the blade snaked an arc, shaking the nearest monsters, their mourning numbers rolling in the tunnel. "Steel your wings." Rayon shouted, with wild beast-like decisions in his voice. He pulled out a dagger and stabbed a monster in the throat, while holding another attack. Eric felt his physical strength was losing, but his courage had not diminished. He turned to the leader, pointing directly at the red-eyed demon. "Don't think of it," he shouted loudly, his words pure and determined, as if the guardians of the village were fighting the wind. The battle fell into a rubber, and the monster's claws wiped Eric's wind. He used a sword to protect Rayon's retreat. In the gap, they retreated into a hidden crack, so small that they could only curl up. The mist weakened slightly here, and Leon gasped and leaned against the stone wall. "My family once had blood bonds with these monsters," he said softly, his breath filled with a sluggish anger. "My grandfather took a team to hunt for a hunt, but because of a misjudgment, their leader escaped, and he grew deep in this hatred. I vowed to conquer everything, but every time I faced it, it was like repeat that failure." His words made Eric's mind move, and he responded with a head, "We are not just fighting. I will protect this mission and no longer let the shadows of the past swallow us." This exchange ignited Eric's determination. He held the handle tightly and his eyes were even more powerful. After only a moment of rest, they slammed the crack again. Eric swung the sword and took the monster's head straight, and the sword light tore the mist and finally knocked it down. The monsters howled and disappeared deep into the tunnel. The two took advantage of the opportunity to move forward and continued to walk along the passage towards the core of the site. Although their physical strength was exhausted, the plan for the destruction of the drama was not changed. Ahead, the controversial fire guided them, and new challenges were waiting. They walked along the tunnel, and the concealed fires were like intimidating lights, guiding the direction in the darkness. Eric's breathing was rapid, and the shadow sword in his hand moved slightly, leaving the blood on the sword blade. The curse fog is still lying on the plate, turning into a sticky shadow, invading their visual lines and making the surrounding stone walls blurred. Leon followed closely, his shoulders swaying slightly, revealing the exhaustion of his physical strength, but his steps were steady, as if the hunter would never move. Soon they came to an arch, with vines and broken stone pillars marking the entrance to the lost temple. The ancient wanderer stands deep underground, with the air filled with the mixture of soil and metal. The wall is filled with blurred rune pictures, flashing with strange blue light. Eric stopped and started to check it out. "This place feels like living," he said, with pure alertness in his voice. "We have to be careful." An invisible barrier suddenly appeared, blocking their way. The guarding of the boundary is like a twisted energy network, sealing the entrance, and anyone who approaches will feel a burning pressure. Leon tried to explore the picture with a dagger, but was pushed open by a recoil force, and he cursed it. "These runes are ancient guardians," he said, with familiar resentment scattered in his language. "My father once mentioned a similar boundary, saying that it was to protect the treasure, and also trap the invaders." His words revealed the family's past, allowing Eric to glance at the shadow behind Rian that was an unfinished regret. The curse fog was added here, and Eric's vision began to blur, and he slammed his head, forcing himself to concentrate. "We have to unravel these runes," he said, speaking like a rock. "We can't let them stop us." They knelt down to study the graphic, and Rayon pointed out several key symbols in his memory. Eric touched lightly with a stinger to try the graphic's touching mechanism. During the process, the mist made their movements become irritating, and every error brought a stinging pain. Finally, they cracked some of the boundaries, and a hidden door opened slowly, revealing a secret room full of historical wall paintings. They were exhausted, so they leaned against the stone wall for a while. Leon's eyes fell on the wall, which depicted an ancient war. "My family tried to take away the treasure from here," he murmured, his voice carrying a suffocating anger. "The failure of our ancestors made us bear the burden of blood, and from that time on, we learned the lonely price." Eric clicked, held the handle tightly, and felt a new sense of determination. "We won't repeat it," he responded. "This time, we'll face it together." Deep in the secret room, they discovered a glorious ancient gem, embedded in the wall, which seemed to be the key to destroying the sword. Eric reached out to touch it, and the gem burst out with light, and at the same time woke up a sleeping guardian creature, a petrified beast, roaring out of the shadow. They hurriedly retreated along the passageway. The glow of the stone guided the way forward, and the new threat followed. As they move forward, their minds are more determined, and the plan for destroying the drama will gradually take shape. Eric and Rayon ran along the narrow passage, and the stone wall was filled with a faint green light, moving like a living thing, guiding them to their retreat. The roar of the guardian creature roared behind, and the petrified beast had woken up from its sleep. Its body was as big as a mountain, and its eyes were flashing with bloodthirsty red lights. Eric turned his head and glanced at it, shattering the entrance of the secret room, and his heartbeat was as fierce as a war drum, forcing himself to stop. "Ray-Owen, go first," he shouted, his voice trembling with a trembling sound. "This thing is coming to me. I have to hold it." Ray-Owen gasped and leaned against the wall, with exhausted lines engraved on his face. He hesitated for a moment, then held the fastened dagger. "Are you crazy? Let's face it together." But Eric slammed and lifted the shadow drama, and the cold breath scattered on his body made his arm sting. "No, this is my battle. Your family, have you said their blood debt, right? Tell me, Leon, why do you always carry that loneliness alone?" This sentence made Leon's eyes darken. He leaned against the stone wall, and his words were filled with bitterness. "My father once led a team to enter a similar situation and sacrificed everything for the sake of his treasure. In the end, he was the only one who escaped and cared for the family's curse. From then on, I learned to distrust anyone. But you, Eric, you let me see another possibility." This confession was like a cold wind, blowing away some mist, making Eric feel the warmth of his partner. He replied, "Then let us prove that there will be no more casualties this time. The curse fog becomes more tangled here, like a living fog surrounds, twisting the visual line and keeping the silhouette of the creature in a silhouette at a glance." Eric took a deep breath, suppressing the fear that surged in his heart. The dark force penetrated from the blade and tried to swallow his will. He held the handle of the sword and rushed towards the beast. The first shot showed an arc, which was opened by its thick stone skin. The creature's claws swept, Eric's side was avoiding, and his feet were sliding on the damp ground, almost losing balance. The mist made everything clear. He couldn't see the attack on the slut, so he could only directly feel the battle. Each move was accompanied by the sluts of the sword, reminding him of his evil confusion. As the battle continued, Eric's arm strength gradually exhausted, but he felt a new force awakening in his heart. A violent blast hit him into the stone wall. He gritted his teeth in pain and used a sword to counterattack, stabbing the creature's weakness. The dark power tried to control him, causing the blade to roar, but he forced the pressure and shouted, "I won't be controlled by you." Leon watched from the side and finally joined the battle and threw out a dagger to help. Finally, the guardian creatures emitted the last sound of mourning, which disintegrated into gravel. Eric gasped with the sword, and Rayon stepped forward to support him. "We did it," Rayon said, with a little more warmth in his voice. Together, they looked to the depth of the passage where there was no light guide, and the plan to destroy the sect was waiting for them to continue to execute. The two of them walked forward slowly, and their determination in their hearts was as bright as steel. Eric and Rayon stepped out of the narrow passage, facing the biting cold wind, and snowflakes were like invisible sharp blades that drew over their tired bodies. The village in the border is hidden under the vast mountain foot, the wooden house is covered with white frost, and the heat coming out of the smoke twists into blurred lines in the wind. Here is the edge of the mainland of Middle-earth, with winter storms raging endlessly, sealing the road into an frozen maze. They wrapped their cloaks and stepped into the central building of the village. The fire pit was extinguished and only sporadic burrows were left in the snow. The atmosphere of the village was extremely intense, and a group of villagers gathered outside the old winery, spreading inexplicable fear in the low language. Rayun's eyes swept through the crowd and noticed a strange figure, a man in a dark cloak, who was whispering a disaster. "The minions of the Dark Lord have penetrated into you," the man said, his voice slipping like a snake, trying to move the determination of the crowd. "That drama will bring destruction, and anyone who approaches will turn into dust." Eric held the handle of the shadow drama and felt a cold movement coming from the drama. He turned to Rayon and said in a whisper, "This is a genius, and they can't spread more confusion." Rayon pointed, with a flash of alertness in his eyes, "I'll go and see is coming, be careful." In order to assemble the team, they first visited Grom, the clerk in the village, a dwarf iron craftsman who used to be a brave warrior. His workshop is located on the edge of the village, a grotto half buried in the snow, filled with the echoes of iron and metal breath. Eric pushed the door open and saw Grom dancing heavy horns and repairing a battle axe with a raw lens. The dwarf glanced at the visitor, and a rough voice burst out, "Outsider? Are you looking for death or trouble in this weather?" Eric looked straight into his eyes and said, "We need your help, Grom. The Dark Leader is threatening this land, and the sword in my hand is the key." Grom stopped working, and a shadow appeared in his eyes. "My family was the guardian of the dwarf fortress," he said quietly, his spirit as hard as a rock. "But the Devil's men used their sensibility to inspire us, causing the fortress to fall and live as much as possible. I vow not to get involved in the war again." This sentence sank Eric's heart, and he replied, I know. The pain of losing it, but if we don't act, the whole world will be sank." Rayon added, "We are not just fighting, I chose trust." Grom was silent for a moment, and finally he was very nervous. "Okay, young man, if you have that determination, I will help you." The storm continued on the outside, and the snowflakes slapped the workshop like wild beasts, but they moved quickly. Grom summoned a few reliable villagers and old fighters to form a team, despite the cold winds that had spread. They replenished food and trim weapons, and Eric's leadership gradually emerged in the process. When the team finally got ready for development, they stepped on the steep mountain road, stepping on the ice-clad stones, each step symbolizing the promise of progress. Rayon and Eric walked in front of the team, their tacit understanding became more intense, and their eyes were on the unknown path ahead. The team advanced along the winding mountain road, and the bitter wind blew over the snow into sharp debris, stinging their skin. Eric walked in front, holding the Shadow Slayer in his hand, and a faint cold light radiated from his body, as if guiding the direction. He glanced back at the team. Grom took several villagers and old fighters, his steps were steady, and despite his fatigue, he still showed the style of a former warrior. This dwarf was once the guardian of the dwarf fortress, and now his addition makes Eric feel a stable force. The mountain road gradually becomes narrower, with steep ice walls on both sides, which may slide into the deep and clear if you are not careful. Suddenly, a violent shock came from the underground, and the frozen ground collapsed and formed a cunning trap. The team was forced to move. Eric and Rain fell into a sideways, while Grom walked with the others. Eric cursed the bad terrain and tried to keep the picture calm. "This place is like a living thing," he said, with pure determination in his voice. "We have to get together quickly." In the narrow fork, they found a newly joined villager, a young man named Colin, who was sneaking up on Eric's backpack. Colin was originally a hunter in the village. He said that he had traveled in the surrounding area, which was always a mysterious secret. This time, he attempted to get the shadow sword. Rayon's eyes captured the scene, and he made a sudden move, grabbing Colin's arm. "Do you think we are blind?" Rayon's words were as cold as a knife. "The Dark Master's minions are hidden in our team." Colin slammed, revealing a slight smile. "This drama should have been given to the Master. You're just scratching the wall." The war broke out. Eric slammed Colin's raid, and sparked the blade and the ice wall. Despite Colin's skill, Eric calmed his feet with the inner sense of righteousness. During the battle, Leon took advantage of the opportunity to suppress the enemy and suppressed him to the ground. To breathe, they took a break in a temporary camp, a natural rocky recess. In the campground, the fire burned faintly, melting some ice and snow. Eric wiped the blade and turned to Rayon. "You're always so alert, what makes you like this?" he asked. Leon was silent for a moment, and a flash of haze flashed in his eyes. "I betrayed the family," he said softly. "To survive, I chose to escape, and I saw them living in the fire of war. The pain made me learn the preciousness of trust." This sentence shocked Eric's mind, and he replied with a headline, we are all in the past, but now, we are facing each other. This conversation strengthened their connection, and Eric felt that his leadership was even more indifferent at this moment. Soon after, Grum arrived at the site with the others, and they quickly dealt with Colin's threat and drove him up. The team regrouped and continued to move along the mountain road, with eyes locked on the road ahead. With a little slower trend, their pace became more decisive and they were ready to face the next challenge. The team left the frozen mountain area and stepped into the edge of the storm of the flames, and the air became hot and sticky. The lava rivers meander and flow like blood, spitting out sulfur, and poisonous fogs circulate at low altitude, making the visual line blurred. Eric walked forward, and the shadow drama in his hand reflected red light, as if warning about the dangers around him. He glanced at Grum's pace, and the dwarf's armor still had the frost of the mountains, reminding them of their just-income experience. The terrain of the marsh is narrow and changing, and the team is forced to advance along a rock bridge. Most of his physical strength was exhausted, and Leon and several villagers began to cough continuously. The illusion caused by the poisonous fog made them see the illusory firewall. Eric gritted his teeth and shouted, "Don't confuse these phantoms. Focus on and keep up with me." His voice must be like a rock, and he couldn't hide his fatigue. Suddenly, a villager slipped and almost slammed into the lava. Grum stretched out his thick arm at once and pulled him back. "Be careful, kid, there are no people here." The dwarf growled, with the old man's warning in his language. In front, a giant flame demon rose from the rock crack, his body falling like lava, and flames burst out from his eyes. It guards the key forks leading to the storm, and roars shake the entire swamp. The battle exploded, and Eric rushed to the slap, and the blade collided with the flame demon's fire whip, bursting out dazzling sparks. The team should be headed against the trap, and Rayon took several people to the side wings to try to distract the enemy. Grum danced his axe and shouted, "This beast is just a puppet of flames. Go to its core." His attack was fierce, but it was not accurate due to the influence of illusions, and was whipped by the fire. During the war, Eric and Grum retreated into a lava rift and avoided the attack at the moment. The heat waves in the rift were a little slow. Grum wiped his sweat and said in a low voice, "I have fought against monsters in the dwarf fortress. In that battle, I should have guarded my defense, but I let my companions live because of a moment of hesitation." His words were rough and sincere, with regret in his eyes. "But I swear, from that moment on, I will fight for my allies." Eric pointed his head and held the handle of the sword. "Your loyalty makes us stronger. We will survive." This exchange ignited Eric's determination, and he realized that the fatigue in the team was gradually showing weakness. Finally, with collective efforts, they defeated the Defiant of Fire and forced it into the lava river. The team gasped and reunited, continued to move along the fork, eyes fixed on the far side. The wind is filled with heat, and although their steps are stable, their will has not moved. As the team left the storm of flame swamp, the air gradually turned from a hot wet fog to a dry storm. Eric led everyone along the winding old little land. Far, a hidden ruins are in a vague shape. It is a stone-built strip that is swallowed by vines. It was once the spot for ancient guardians. Now only walls and hidden springs are left, providing temporary shelter. The tired team arrived in the sunny distance. Leon fell first by the pile of stones, gasping for breath, sweat staining his cloak. Eric inserted the shadow sword into the crack on the ground and tried the storm that was ready to move in the sword blade. The sword's body shone with a faint light, and he closed his eyes and concentrated, but was hit by a sudden illusion. The shadow of the leader of the darkness was twisted before his eyes, mocking his fragility. The power of this curse is like a stubborn poisonous sting, invading his will and making his hands tremble slightly. A villager in the team, named Ted, was a young man who had been hiding from a war in the rural village. Seeing him couldn't help but open his mouth. "Eric, we have paid too much, why don't we stop there? This drama will only bring more disasters. We are ordinary people, not heroes." His words are full of doubts and striking, reflecting the fear of long-term escape. Grum, the dwarf, roared to stop Ted. "Close your mouth, boy. Do you think adventure is a game? I used to fight against the fire giant in the underground fortress. That time we couldn't defend our defense, not because we were insufficient strength, but because someone was swaying like you." His voice was as rough as a stone mill, and his eyes flashed past the shadow of the past war. That failure had made him lose his friend and created an unyielding determination from this. Eric heard, holding the sword's hand calmer, and he turned to Grom and responded simply, "Your words are like irons, which wake me up. We can't retreat." Beside the fire, the two sat down. The flames reflected the ancient wall paintings of the ruins. These images depicted the ancestors' legends against the darkness, adding a mysterious atmosphere to the surrounding environment. Grum continued to share, "After that battle, I learned it. It was not that I was afraid of being brave, but that I stood up." Eric pointed his head, took a deep breath, and held the sword again to practice. The sword's curse gradually retreated, and he felt a new force that was flooding from the team. Although Ted was not completely convinced, he saw Eric's determination and silently retreated to the team. It was darker and the team was burning fire for a while, replenishing dry food and checking weapons. Eric stood up and looked at the contours of the far side. Their journey was not over yet, but the tranquility at this moment allowed everyone to regain their will and prepare for the challenge that was about to come. The thin fog in the morning covered the ancient little girl like gray. Eric led his team to leave the ruins, stepping on the mossy stone, and advancing towards the fortress of the Dark Lord. Far, the silhouette of the mountain is like a giant spine, hiding the threads they seek, a sacrificial ritual that can reveal the ancient ritual that destroys the Shadow Sword. Grum carried his axe, his steps were steady, his eyes swept at the bushes around him, reminding everyone to stay alert. "This road is as cunning as a mine in my hometown, and I accidentally fell into it," he murmured, carrying the real echo of the underground world in his verbs. It was the seals that the dwarves have been exploring in the deep purity of their generations, making his words full of authority. The team advanced along the narrow island valley, and the air was filled with curse and fogs. This purple-black smoke twisted the visual line and made people fall into a trap. Eric held the Shadow Sword tightly, and the blade reflected a faint light to help them identify the path. Suddenly, a low buzzing bird rose up, and the fortress's elite guard appeared in the patrol. They were wearing dull armor and holding lighted spears. The magical junction covered the surroundings like an invisible net, and any static situation would be triggered to send a warning. In order to avoid it, Eric ordered a split operation. "Grom, you take Rayon to the left, Ted, follow me to the right. Don't delay." His voice must be not strong, like the valor of a novice leader. During the trip, Ted and Eric tightly flicked a silk silhouette on their faces. They hid behind a huge rock and waited for the siege. Ted spoke lightly, "Eric, I'm not a slut, but every time I see these dark things, I remember when I was a child." His words trembled, and the unscathed wounds were tangled in the tune. "That year, the dark force swept my village, and the flames swallowed everything. I hid in the straw pile and heard the screams of my teachers. Since then, I just want to escape." This reminiscence caused Ted's figure to slightly shrink, revealing the roots of his fugitives from the rural areas, the deep terror. Eric stopped, turned to look at him, his eyes flashing to understand. "I understand, Ted. We were not born brave. But now, we have to rely on each other. Not for the reputation of heroes, but for those who are still waiting for us to go back." His response was simple and direct, revealing the growth from farmer to leader, which made Ted calm and relax his shoulders slightly. This interaction made Eric realize that leaders not only need to slap, but also need to calm the wounds of their minds to gather strength from it. However, the rough terrain kept blocking them. A hidden trap suddenly collapsed and the soil slipped, forcing the team to speed up, and the curse and fog became more chaotic and made the breathing heavy. Finally, they arrived outside the fortress, and on a stone platform, the policemen rushed up, indicating the patrol team's police. The teams gathered together to check weapons and prepare for the upcoming confrontation. In the night, they will condense like a steel, waiting for the next move. The revelation of the warning swayed like a ghostly murmur, reverberating on the stone platform. The purple-black curse fog became denser, distorting the air and blurring the light into a group of chaos. Eric curled up behind a piece of rock along the platform with his team, holding his handle tightly and his palms were sticky. He looked around, and the Guardian patrol team was approaching. Their armor flashed in the fog, and any slight silence could trigger a fatal pursuit. Ted leaned against the rock, breathing rapidly. His figure trembled slightly, causing the other members to see uneasy eyes. Grum growled, carrying the battle axe to stabilize, and his eyes closed to Ted. "Boy, your fear will swallow everything like a crack in a mine." His words carry the deep underground cow, which is the warning that the dwarves inherited from the ancestral traditions. They have faced countless betrayals in the dark tunnels, and the hesitation of allies often turns into a fatal trap. This detail adds more weight to Grom's vocabulary. He is not responsible for it, but draws teaching from the blood of the ethnic group. "I've seen too many dwarf brothers collapse in the deep purity, and the weakness in the moment caused the entire mind to collapse." Eric turned to Grom, his eyes definitely being reckless. "We are not digging out gems, Grom, but saving those who are still alive. Ted is not an enemy, he is just being smeared by the shadows of the past." His words are simple, directly from the pure sight of the farmland, leaving Grom slightly lighter, although the dwarf's solidity is still hidden between his eyebrows. This conversation made Eric feel that his leadership was growing, and he learned to use understanding to rift rather than a simple command. The tightness in the team gradually resolved, and Rayon patted Ted on the shoulder. "We all need time to face ghosts, but now is not the time to retreat." Ted took a deep breath, held the short sword in his hand, and his shoulders were straight. Although his fear was still there, this resolution brought the team's will to regain. Just as they were preparing to move, the curse fog suddenly increased, and a sliver of ripples spread out from the center of the platform. It was a magic trap. The ground was shaking slightly, trying to absorb any steps close to it. Eric ordered in a low voice, "Follow me, we will roam along the edge." They moved quietly, avoiding the Guardian line, and walking lightly and filling the alarm. When they successfully crossed the trap and advanced towards the fortress, the night fell on the old turban, and the team's pace became more tacit, ready to face the next challenge. The path forward extends before your eyes, filling with unknown tests. They moved along the edge of the stone platform, and the night penetrated into each crack like ink, and a scent of decay was filled with the air. Eric was headed, with a steady pace, and then he avoided the previous tidal wave. When the silhouette of the ancient fortress appears from the darkness, a high-profile stone ring is reflected in the eyes, with the surface full of ancient runes, flashing with glittering light like stars. This is the forgotten horizon of the Middle-earth, hidden deep in the mist, symbolizing the power of the ancient guardians. After reaching the fortress, Eric quickly checked the items needed for the ceremony and found that the key runestone had been broken into pieces and scattered on the damp ground. This accident caused the team's taxi to sink, and the pressure of time increased like a spell. The resurrection of the Dark Lord is imminent. They must find a replacement immediately, and Eric's eyes swept towards the surrounding stone rings, instructing everyone to collect nearby mine fragments. Grom, the background of the dwarf warrior, made him know the underground mines well, and immediately rolled up a few blocks of light quartz. "These things are not pure, but they can be more than enough," he murmured, his voice as low and powerful as an echo in the underground. "I used something similar in my ancestors' mines, and I'll take it for a little longer." While the others were busy, Eric pulled Ted back into the shadow on the side of the sacrificial. Ted's hand was still shaking slightly, and a shadow of the past flashed in his eyes. "I never thought I'd come to this point," Ted said softly, vocalizing the truth of a village accent. "As a child, I watched the dark power swallow my family. Their screams are still in my ears in the fire." His words revealed the forgotten inventiveness, which made Eric's heart tighten. As a leader who came out of the countryside, Eric responded simply, "We are all on the back, but the battle is to not let it happen again." This exchange was like a warm current, strengthening their relationship with each other. Ted pointed his head and clenched his fists to signal the preparation of the face-to-face ceremony. The ritual begins, and Eric places the replaced mine into the center of the ring and murmurs the ancient mantra. The air began to twist, and a deep and purplish dark energy surged out from the sacrificial accord, trying to swallow everything around. The team quickly formed a defense line. Leon danced his staff to block the energy ripples, and Grum used a war axe to slash the approaching shadow. The conflict intensified, and the response of the dark forces caused the ground to shake, forcing them to maintain the sport and guard the situation. Ted stepped forward and stabbed a group of Rocket Darkness with a short sword, demonstrating his growth. As the Guardian's light finally released from the stone ring, the dark energy gradually disappeared, and the team gasped and stood firm. Although the ceremonial is not perfect, the ancient power has initially awakened and injected new vitality into their journey. They began to organize their shops and prepare for the dangerous path that continued to cross the mainland of Middle-earth. They left the ancient fortress and stepped into the mist depths around them. The underground tunnel was like a winding giant net, extending towards the fortress of the Dark Lord. Eric led the team, holding the faint light left after the ceremonial ceremony, and the hidden support was like a thin layer of thinness, covering their movements, unable to completely dissipate the pungent scent of sulfur in the air. The tunnel walls are covered with moist moss, occasionally flashing with dim mineral light, guiding them. The team moved forward silently, and carefully avoided the gravel on the ground at every step to avoid surprise and hidden guards. Soon, the patrol monster guarding the mob appeared. Those twisted creatures, with large bodies, and their eyes were like burnt blood beads, wandering in the tunnel. Eric waved his hand and signaled everyone to stick close to the wall, waiting with his breath. Ryan said in a low voice, "These guys' smell is more sensitive than we think, and we have to walk past the fork in the road ahead." His voice fell, and a guarded growl came from a distance, making Ted's hand involuntarily hold the tight sword. The fatigue has begun to invade the team. After running around every day, everyone's pace has become heavy. Grum gasped and said, "If we continue like this, we will be caught like rats in a mine. My tribe has fought underground and never retreated when facing the dark force." Eric glanced at the dwarf warrior, and seized the opportunity to pull him into a narrow wall to rest. "Tell me more, Grum. How did your ancestors respond to these monsters?" he asked, his voice with curiosity. Grum wiped the sweat of his magnitude, and his words were as thick as rocks. "In the depths of the dwarf mountain, we had built a fortress to fight against the evil spirits that crawled out of the cracks. They destroyed our mines and killed my uncle, but my father took his tribesmen to fight back with runes and guarded the last line of defense. At that time, I was still a little boy and learned to use it." The axe turned tragedy into strength. This conversation made Eric's mind move, and he responded, "Your story inspired me, and we will find a way out." This exchange relieved the team's tightness. Ted and Rayon took the opportunity to swallow some dry food, and the differences in opinions emerged in fatigue. Rayon continued to move forward, while Ted murmured to rest on the spot. Finally, they decided to pause for a short time, and Eric explained, "We can't be distracted, the scroll is right ahead." After the recovery, they went deeper, avoiding another wave of guarding patrols. Finally, he arrived at a gate, and placed the scroll and key roll in his head, recording the weakness of the leader's true face. Eric took it out carefully, but when he turned around, a slight wind exposed their traces and a guard turned his head with a warning. The team hurried back to the tunnel, and the light of the support flashed slightly to cover their escape. After sorting out the loot, they continued to move along the tunnel to prepare for the next challenge. They continued to dive from the depths of the tunnel, with a corruption scent of the air, as if the underground curse was in a low voice. Eric, the leader of the team, held the rolled ancient scroll in his hands, and the runes on the paper flashed under the faint light of torches, revealing the key points of the Dark Lord, a hidden heart crystal, which can only be disintegrated by one precise blow. The team was staggering, tired and scattered like invisible chains, and only a few hard bread left in the bag. Ted walked along and said, "The air in this ghost place seemed to be about to squeeze people dry, and my arms were soft." In front, a large stone arch stood, which was the entrance outside the fortress, surrounded by twisted spires, and flame-like runes on the top of the tower danced in the night. The heavy guard troops were scattered like a tide, and groups of monster patrolmen came back. Their skin was as rough as scorched earth, and their eyes were flashing with a greedy light. Eric signaled the team to dive into a hidden rock wizard and quickly unfolded the coil. I wrote here that the leader's crystal is hidden under the leader's armor, he said in a low voice. We have to break through these guys first. Rayon pointed his head, drew out his long bow, and his words were as cold as a winter night. Then let me clear a way first. The battle exploded unexpectedly. As a wave of guards came, Eric High-Rise shadow soared. The storm of light burst out like a ghost, towards a powerful monster leader. The creature was like a giant bear, and its sharp claws were striking out of its sharp cries. Eric's drama collided with it, sparking 4 times. He felt the soreness in his arms, and gritted his teeth and insisted, for the freedom of Middle-earth. The monster leader fought back, swept his claws and swept the shield into Grom's shield, knocking the dwarf warriors away. During the battle, Ted was unstable due to insufficient supplementation and was revived, and his shoulders were bleeding. He fell to the ground and moaned, "Don't die. I can still fight." Taking advantage of a moment of gasping, Eric pulled Grom into the crack. The stone wall there was carved with ancient dwarf symbols, symbolizing the glory of his ancestors. Grom gasped, wiped off the blood from his face, and spoke in a thick and solid rock like a mountain. Our tribe once fought in a deep purity. In order to protect his minerals, his father sacrificed himself and allowed us to open a path of life with the axe. At that time, I vowed never to retreat. This sentence was like a torch that shone Eric's will. He clenched his fists and said firmly, "Your courage has made me see clearly. We are not fighting alone." Reassembled, they adjusted the war. Rayon covered Ted back, and Eric once again rushed towards the monster leader. The sword light flashed. He found a chance to stab his weakness, and the monster let out a deafening roar and fell to the ground to disintegrate. At the end of the battle, the team dragged their tired bodies forward and prepared to go deep into the fortress. The shadow of the animals made Eric's pace more stable. The echoes from the ground have not yet dissipated, and they know that the next challenge is waiting ahead. They passed through the fortress's arch and stepped into a winding underground passage, with glowing moss sprouting on the walls, casting a strange green light. The air was filled with a damp musty smell, as if a long-buried secret was murmuring, making people unable to breathe. Ted's shoulder wound had melted. He gritted his teeth and supported his body, shaking his steps, and complained in a low voice, "The image of the place is to swallow me, and my hands are numb." Eric glanced at him, his heart tightened, without saying much, focused on the front, and the rolls in his hand guided them towards the core. Suddenly, the floor of the passage trembled slightly, and a row of stone statues woke up from the cracks in the wall. These ancient guardians are shaped like a weapon, with flashing runes on their bodies. As the invaders approach, their eyes lit up red and automatically activated the defense mechanism. The stone statue danced with long stone spears, blocked the retreat, and forced the team to fight in the narrow space. Rayon pulled the bow and shot, and the arrow hit the surface of the stone statue, only stirring up debris. "These guys are not afraid of pain," he shouted, his words sing like a rush, reminding everyone not to waste energy. Grom carried the axe and pressed it in front of Ted. His body was as stable as a rock, and he was panting from the continuous battles. He glanced at a side door, engraved with statues of dwarf ancestors, which was the thought of the dwarf miners in the past. "Follow me," he shouted, rushing towards the door with his team. After entering the secret room, they temporarily avoided the pursuit of the stone statue. The light inside is dim, and the wall is filled with reliefs from the dwarfs, depicting the heroic things that ancestors guarded their treasures in the deep purity. Grom gasped in his wall and wiped his sweat, his words heavy as a mountain echo. "My father once fought in a trap like this, falling down to protect the minds of his tribe. His axe became my property, allowing me to learn not to fight for glory, but to live a partner." This talk ignited Eric's fighting spirit. He held the shadow drama tightly and flicked the village in his brain, and turned to the command, "We can't stop. Rayon, look for the weak point. Grom, please hold Ted. Let's destroy those runes together." Ted's injury made him unable to do his best, but he pointed at the side and said weakly, "I can still help, at least don't let me drag my back." They shot again. Eric took the lead. The blade broke through the air, aiming at the rune core of the stone statue. With a hit, a stone statue broke and fragments scattered. Grom's axe smashed the other, and the team's coordination gradually recovered. Despite exhaustion of strength, every step was like carrying a heavy shackle. They still broke most of the traps, and the passage gradually opened. Although the road ahead was covered with dead bodies, Eric felt a new force. They continued to walk deep into the fortress, and their pace was steady, but their will was as firm as steel. The tacit understanding of the team deepened in the crisis, and each person's breathing intersected with the echoes around him, preparing to face the next challenge. They walked out from the underground passage as they saw the outer turret of the dark fortress. A cold stone slab stretched out. On the surrounding high-profile walls, vines scattered like living creatures, emitting decayed breath. There was a biting chill in the air, making people feel like they were in an eternal winter night. The team of the Ghost Warriors has gathered together. These dead figures controlled by the leader of the dark, holding long guns flashing with strange light, with empty eyes full of killing. They came like a tide, blocking all the way, and forcing Eric's team into a dead end. Eric held the shadow drama tightly, and a faint purple light burst out from his body, illuminating the chaotic battlefield. He glanced at Ted and followed. His wound had melted so much that he could hardly grasp the sword, his face as white as stone. I can still hold back, Ted gasped, his voice shaking with a strong sense of stubbornness. Eric pointed, but knew that Ted's drag could be fatal. He shouted, "Rayon, cover your side. Grom, you take Ted to stand firmly." As soon as the voice fell, a ghost warrior came. Eric slammed the blade, cut into the enemy's body, and let out a low roar. The battle fell into chaos, and the ghost's attacks were heartless and connected, and each attack stormed the defense line like frost. Grom danced a giant axe and knocked down several waves of shocks. His body was as firm as an ancient mountain, but he moved a little by little due to his repeated fatigue. He glanced at Eric and said, "Boy, do you remember the story of my father? He never retreated when he guarded his tribe in the deep mine, even if he knew that the axe would take away his last force." This sentence made Eric stunned, and his brain flashed through the dwarf that Grom mentioned earlier, saying that the courage of the monk ignited his will like flames. "We won't fall," Eric responded, his vocal and pure language. "For the sake of living partners, let's go out together." While the ghosts retreated at a while, the team gasped behind a half-destroyed stone pillar. Grom wiped the scum on the axe and continued, "Father once said that the real battle is not in the weapon, but in the heart. Put the sword in your hand, don't let it guide you." Eric pointed at the head, feeling a new force surging, and also noticed that the handle of the shadow drama began to shake slightly, and a backlash of heat flowed into his arm. He felt uncomfortable in the pressure and shouted, "Okay, reassemble it." They attacked again. Eric led the way, and the sword broke through the night sky, tearing several ghosts into pieces. Grom and Rayon cooperated in no way, protecting Ted from being isolated. Although Ted's injuries slowed down, they gradually tear open the defense line and pushed into the fortress. The rhythm of the battle gradually became stable, and everyone's actions were more coordinated. Ahead, the door leading to the fortress hall gradually appeared. The team's will was as unyielding as a steel. They continued to move forward, preparing to face deeper shadows. They rushed into the inner corridor of the fortress, with heavy stone doors hanging behind them, keeping the roar of the spirit warriors out. The corridor is narrow and winding, and the walls are full of ancient runes. These runes flash under the faint light of torches, moving like living things, emitting sensual energy. There is a damp, musty smell in the air, making people feel the historical weight buried deep in the ground. Eric gasped against the cold stone wall. The stem of the shadow drama continued to shake, and the indefinite heat had now climbed up to his shoulders, like an invisible vine that tightened his will. Ted leaned against Grom, his face turned pale, and the blood from his wounds was stained with red cloth. He tried to stand straight, in a low moan in pain. I can still leave," he murmured, his weak voice carrying the unique stubbornness of the farm. He has never been able to be so helpless since he was a child in the fields. "Don't worry about me, keep moving forward." Grom raised his eyes and pressed Ted's shoulder with his rough palm. "Boy, do you think you are a stone? In the dwarf mine, we won't let our companions fall like this." This points out Grom's background. His tribe once guarded the treasures in the deep underground world, and the inherited corpses from generation to generation made him feel equal to the victims. Eric felt the drama's backlash and dizzy, and he gritted his teeth and tried to suppress the darkness that invaded his mind. "This drama, it is devouring me," he said softly, his pure determination in his breath, without fear. Grum turned to him, and the giant axe leaned against the side. "Speak, Eric, my father fought against similar curse deep in the mine. The old axe saved our clan, but also took away his vision. He always said that the price of power is not in the body, but in the unwillingness to give." The dwarf's words were rough and direct, full of the sturdiness of the mountain, revealing the traditions of the ancestors of the clan, reminding Eric of his rural life, and the simple stories there always taught people to face the storm. During a silence, Ray Owen checked Ted's wounds and his eyebrows were tightly locked. "His body is almost exhausted, we can't drag it anymore." Eric held the handle tightly and slammed his heart, but he didn't say much, but looked at Grum directly. "Then, what should we do? Give up the sword and wait for the Dark Leader to recover?" Grum snorted, with a little bitterness in his smile. "It's not that simple, boy. In the father's story, the warriors always choose to carry the heavy lifting, even if they know it will crush themselves." This conversation rekindled Eric's will, and he pointed, "Okay, let's continue. I won't let this drama destroy me, nor will Ted die in vain." The team took a break and Leon used the remaining herbs to suck Ted's wound, although the effect was limited. Eric took a deep breath and felt the heat flow in his body calm down. They stood up and walked along the corridor. The light of the rune guided the way, and took steps towards the depths of the destruction. Each step was more stable, but also had a hidden shadow. They walked deeper along the corridor, stumbled on the stone floor, and gradually entered the core chamber of the fortress. Here is a vast underground hall with glowing crystals hanging on the vaulted ceiling, projecting cold blue light, reflecting the twisted stone statues around them. These statues seemed to be guardians of cursed, quietly emitting suppressed threats. There was a biting chill in the air, making people feel that the hidden ancient power was ready to move. Eric led the team, holding the shadow drama in his hand, and his body moved slightly. He forced himself to ignore the tide of darkness that was rising and focusing on the road ahead. Suddenly, a roar of swelling broke out from the entrance of the secret room, and several vague figures emerged from the stone sculpture. The elite guardian of the Dark Lord, these twisted ghost warriors were dressed in decadent armor and holding green weapons. They stalked towards the team like ghosts, and their sharp claws planned to break through the air. Eric slammed the sword and the first shot broke the arm of a guardian. The blade burst into purple sparks, but the power of the curse suddenly increased, and a blurred line made him miserably. "Things should be dead," he roared, his voice filled with the pride of a farmer, and was filled with exhausted thrust. Grum danced a giant axe and slashed another ghost, and the axe hit the sound in the secret room. "These guys are like stone spirits in mines, very hard," the dwarf roared, sweat slid from his head. Although his actions are powerful, they carry a slight hesitation, which comes from the inheritance of other people. The ancestors who once fought against curses deep underground often paid for their battles. Ted leaned against the wall and weakly lifted the short sword. Leon covered it with a bow and arrow, shot out several exquisite arrows, forcing several guards to retreat. After a short break in the battle, Eric gasped and leaned towards Grum. "This curse, it is devouring my thoughts, and I can't control it anymore." His words were simple and direct, revealing his pure determination as a farmer. Grum grinned, his eyes as firm as rocks were in his eyes despite his fatigue. "Boy, listen to me. In my family's words, an ancestor had faced similar curse. When he guarded the mine, he chose his soul to slay his clans, so that the clan members could escape. The old man often said that the real power was not to slaughter, but to know what was worth paying for." This sentence pointed out the spirit of the dwarf's blood, which made Eric's eyes refocus. He responded with a head, "Then I won't let it destroy us." As the guards came again, the team gathered again and gradually approached the central sacrificial house of the secret room. There stood an ancient stone platform, with the energy of the sword movable on it, and the pressure of time was like an invisible shackle that hugged each of them. Their attacks gradually suppressed the enemy, and the collision sound of the blade and the ghost was endless, and the air was filled with the breath of metal and energy. Eric felt the curse fading slightly, and he took a deep breath and led everyone toward the fort, each step closer to the key to the ruins. The teams were solidified like a steel, and they continued to fight forward and prepared to face the next challenge. They continued to push towards the central sacrificial chamber, stepping on the cold stone slabs every step, and echoing a low echo. Before the fortress, a flashing boundary radiated like a living creature, emitting a scorching purple light, enclosing the shadow snail. This barrier seemed to be the ultimate curse of the leader of the dark, absorbing the power of shadows in the surrounding air, causing the surrounding stone walls to shake slightly. Eric led the team, and the sword was burning in his hands. He felt the curse swept into the brain like a poisonous fog, and his vision began to twist into a blurred whirlpool, making his movements go wild. The barrier of death looks like something alive. Grum roared, his giant axe high, and the axe blade reflected purple light. The dwarf's voice brought the echo of underground mines, from the inheritance that his family has guarded for generations. The ancestors who once fought against the curse in the deep purity always rely on strong will to overcome the crisis of collapse. This sentence made Eric stun slightly. He held the handle tightly and tried to keep his swaying body steady. I can get it, Eric gasped, his words filled with the determination of the village to be straightforward. Despite his blurred eyes, he forced himself to recall the moment he first picked up the sword. At that time, he was just an ordinary farmland, learning to fight to protect others. Suddenly, a strong shock broke out in the boundary, which released an invisible shock wave, causing the team to retreat a few steps. The Ghost Guardian took advantage of the opportunity to reorganize and emerged from the shadows on the side, and the weapons in his hands were flashing with the strange green light. Ted danced short dramas and stood behind. Although he was weak, his movements brought the agility of the past. Rayon pulled his bow in archery, and every attempt was precisely penetrated the enemy, forcing them to retreat slowly. The secondary obstacle comes even more violently. Eric's curse drama, his attack on the Guardian of the Middle, was deviated by the confusion of the eyes, which exposed Grum to the enemy's claws. Boy, don't let that curse swallow you. Remember what my ancestors said, the sacred is not the end, but the torch that shines ahead. Grum shouted, grabbing Eric's shoulder in the gap of the battle. His eyes flashed with a rock-like determination, and this short pause made Eric's will reconverge. He took a deep breath and said, "Let's break it together." This exchange inspired the entire team, and they regrouped and attacked towards the boundary like a tide. The battle entered the climax, and the collision of the blade and energy burst out sparks, and the air was filled with suppressed energy floods. The team gradually suppressed the Guardians and approached the Sacrificial Supreme. Eric felt that the curse was slightly relieved, and he lifted the Shadow Sword and slashed at the weakness of the Standard Junction. Each strike symbolized their group and courage. Although their progress is slow, they are moving forward steadily and ready to face the key moments of destroying the sword. The team's breathing intercourse formed an invisible belt, tightly connecting them. The pace of moving forward gradually unveiled the final chapter of this historical confrontation. Their attacks were like a violent rain of wind, and the collision between the blade and the boundary burst out with dazzling light, shaking the stone walls of the secret room. Eric slashed with all his strength, and the spear pierced into the moving barrier, releasing a spear burst violently, and the fragments scattered like rain. The boundary collapsed, revealing the central sacrificial avatar, and the shadow incarnation of the Dark Leader rose from it, a twisted form that seemed to be made of black fog and resentment, emitting a suffocating decay. The new environmental element is the surrounding energy vortex, extending like a living touch, trying to swallow everything, forcing the team to maintain shape in a chaotic spiral. Is this his true face? It's even more ugly than I thought. Grum roared, his giant axe dancing, and the axe face was flashing with metal light. The dwarf's words carry the family's inheritance of the family. The blood that once fought against the deep creatures in the underground castle made him still guard Eric's side even though he was exhausted. The vision begins to interfere with the team. Ted sees the old enemy of the phantom and kills the enemy. Rayon's vision is blurred, and the arrows are deviated from the target. The shadows that consumed all their energy covered them, and each step was like stepping on quicksand, dragging down the action. Eric felt the waves of the curse climbing like a poisonous creature, but he held the shadow drama tightly, and his inner righteousness guided him like a light tower. "Grom, how many roads have we walked?" he gasped, his breath full of pure determination. The dwarf paused for a moment and grabbed his arm. "Boy, from the dawn of your farm to the core of this darkness, our journey taught me that the feud is not over, but the melting of the new dawn. My ancestors learned this point in the collapsed cave, the group to penetrate the eternal night." This was like a warm current injecting Eric's tranquility, allowing him to regain his strength, and his brotherhood turned into an invisible shield. The battle enters the white heat transformation, and the shadow of the leader becomes a curse wave, twisting the air into a sharp blade. The secondary obstacle is unscathed, an illusion that Eric sees his teammates fall, and he must directly guard them. Grom's axe hit a fatal blow. Ted and Rayon took the opportunity to counterattack and force the enemy back to the sacrificial supreme. Eric high blade, injecting all the righteous light, hitting the core of the shadow sword. The sword shattered, burst out pure light, swallowing the body of the leader. The Dark Lord let out the last wail, which turned into dust and dissipated. The shadows on the mainland of Middle-earth gradually faded away, and the sun fell again. Eric knelt beside the fort, and the team surrounded him, exhausted and full of glory. Their journey was full. From an ordinary farmer to a leader, Eric learned the truth about inheriting and joining the group. Peace comes to an end, the story quietly ends in this eternal light, courage and friendship are forever in mind. The team slowly left the secret room and entered a new world.